Let's start with the teams in contention at BetMGM. You've got both New York teams in the top five to win the World Series. Yankees at plus 450, Mets right behind at 5-1. Dodgers are the favorites at plus 325, followed by Houston at 4-1. So we're going to begin with best rotation. The Dodgers are number one, Astros are number two, Mets are number four, Yankees are number five. And we've got listed here each starting pitcher for each rotation. And some of these rotations will change. For example, Clayton Kershaw will return to the Dodgers at some point. Cookie Carrasco is on the IL right now for the Mets. But when you look at the rotations here, which of these teams, the favorites to win the series, do you think have the advantage or the best rotation?
I think the best rotation, at least the most top-heavy rotation, still for me has to be the Mets. Because if you look at Max Scherzer, I know he gave up a few runs last night to the Yankees, but still, like the ultimate competitor, there's a large body of work there. It's not like we're going to take one game out of context and say, oh, Max Scherzer's washed. No, he's still one of the premier pitchers in baseball. And you combine him with Jacob deGrom if he can stay healthy. Because here's the thing about rotations. Yes, you need depth, but sometimes you can get away with 3 top line starters. That's really all you need in a best of 5 or a best of 7 game series. And so I think you're looking at the teams who have the 3 starters who are really lights out. So for me, I think it's going to be the Mets. I think they can cobble together a good rotation out of Chris Bassett. Taijuan Walker seems a bit untrustworthy, but maybe Carlos Carrasco will be a little bit better as far as, the third or fourth starter in that rotation. Houston has a good rotation. The way that Framber Valdez has been pitching, I think he is kind of slept on for one of the better pitchers in all of baseball. Justin Verlander, the favorite to win the Cy Young. Obviously, he's up there. Obviously, has the postseason experience, too, because I think that's the question mark with the Dodgers is Tony Gonsolin has been so good during the regular season, but I think we saw a little glimpse during the All-Star game where he struggled with some of the best players or best hitters in baseball at the All-Star game. And so maybe that's the unknown commodity for the Dodgers because Tyler Anderson before this year, he wasn't a known commodity. He was pitching for the Pirates. So maybe these guys kind of turn back into a pumpkin. I will say Julio Urias deserves to be in the conversation of great postseason pitchers. Mitch White, that's kind of a question mark. Dustin May has pitched in a postseason, which if you've been on the Dodgers for a while, you've probably pitched in a postseason just because, they're in the postseason every single year. But that's kind of my read. Yankees are kind of a wild card. Garrett Cole, can you trust him? I don't know. Like, they have a good rotation. It's just, for being one of the favorites, I'm not sure if I think that they have one of the better rotations.
Yeah, I'm with you. The Astros are sneaky good, particularly Framber Valdez. I feel like every time he takes the mound, he's one of the best pitchers in the majors, and it's probably because he's overshadowed by Justin Verlander. But I'm really with the Mets here. And once they get Cookie Carrasco back, the way Max Scherzer is pitching, and I understand that he lost last night, but his worst outings are still pretty damn good. I just love that rotation from top to bottom. And I also think, too, that you made a very good point, and you don't necessarily need 5 great starters to have a great rotation. You need about 3 in the postseason. The Mets have 5 guys that can get it done. Taijuan Walker goes tonight. He's been a little iffy down the stretch, but I would actually go with the Mets here and maybe the Astros too. What about the best bullpen? Houston leads the major leagues with a 3.01 ERA. Yankees are right there too, followed by the Dodgers and the Mets. Where would you lean here?
This is a tougher one because bullpen is so tricky because it is so mental. Like, you can see these guys deal throughout the regular season and when they're playing the worst teams and kind of pad their stats. But I think it's different. And this is where I think experience kind of matters in the bullpen, especially when we're talking about closers. We talked about this yesterday where the pressure is really on these closers, and some of these teams kind of have Achilles heel when it comes to their closers. Looking at the Dodgers, Craig Kimbrell has been very beatable for the Dodgers as of late. He has a 4.36 ERA, I believe. Even as good as the Dodgers are as a staff, I think that is probably their biggest area of concern. And the Yankees, they've had a ton of guys on the injured list. They lost Michael King. Clay Holmes has kind of reverted back to not being the dominant guy that we saw in the first half of the season. Aroldis Chapman is a huge name, but we've seen in the postseason that he can give it up. And a lot of it was kind of on Joe Madden that year that the Cubs won the World Series because, he was out there for 3 innings and just throwing slower and slower every single time. But I don't know. I think all of these teams are about the same when it comes to the bullpen because I think that's really a factor that's hard to predict when it comes to the postseason. And plus, we'll see some starters come in as relievers when it comes to these postseason series.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I'm a little worried about the Dodgers just because when you look at how they've struggled down the stretch, that's the one thing. Craig Kimbrell, even though he's been good, he has an ERA over 4. They clearly don't have Kenley Jansen, who's now with the Braves, which is interesting because he's actually had a nice bounce back season. I would probably go with the Astros here, which I think is the obvious choice. But I think the Dodgers are a bit of a misnomer. And if there's one area in which, at least right now, maybe they have a weak spot, this is it, because we've seen a couple games where, even last night is a perfect example, the Brewers got 3 runs late off the Dodgers. Would that make you hesitate on putting a future on LA?
Yeah, I think it would, just because they're the favorites. If you are
Yeah.
taking a favorite in any field, you want that to be the clear, far and away choice to win the World Series. And right now, we see the Dodgers do this every single year. And here's the problem when trying to predict the World Series. It's not based on who's the best team on paper, because if that was the case, the Dodgers would have won more than one World Series since what, 1980? They've been this great regular season team for the past decade or so, but it just hasn't translated into rings. So I think you take that into account. And there's other factors. I think a lot of it is which team gets hot at the right time, because a team we're not even talking about in this segment is the Braves. I think they have a great rotation. Spencer Strider, Max Fried, Mike Soroka could be coming back
Hmm.
from the injured list, and he used to be the ace of that staff. So keep your eye out for teams who are trending in the right direction going into September. And right now, that's the biggest question mark for the Yankees. How are you going to trust a team that has Garrett Cole throwing temper tantrums in the dugout? They've got the skipper like pounding on the press conference table. So I think, there are other factors than just, who has the most runs per game, who has the best team ERA. It's more than just the numbers.
Oh, no question about that. Now, coming up here in just a few minutes, we'll take a look at NFL running back props and discuss which ones we like when we play Take Your Pick. But right now, we're talking about the teams that are the favorites to win the World Series. And when you look at runs per game, you just mentioned that Dodgers, Yankees, Mets, Astros, these are the teams we're looking at. The Dodgers, I think, are clearly the team here, averaging 5.35 runs per game. The Yankees are second at 5.02, but that is absolutely something that is misleading because they haven't been able to score at all recently.
Yeah, and also a lot of it is matchups, because the big question mark for the Yankees is, can they finally get past the Astros in the ALCS? Because the Yankees in the past, I think 10 years, have been to the ALCS twice, and each time they were sent home packing by the Astros. So sometimes we'll see this, like certain teams just match up better against certain teams, and I think the Astros match up pretty well against the Yankees. The problem with the Yankees lineup is sometimes it looks better than it is because they have so many home run hitters and they're kind of reliant on the long ball. Like Aaron Judge can't keep you out of, scoring 0 runs every night, every
Right.
single night. You need to have a reliable source of offense that is not just home runs, because you're not going to play every game at Yankee Stadium. It is a huge help that you've been playing well and you have your division basically on lock, so you'll get some of those home games probably. But still, I think it's hard to trust the Yankees for me, just because it's not a top to bottom, really consistent offense like we see with maybe the Astros.
Yeah, I think the Dodgers are the obvious choice here with Mookie Betts and Trey Turner, Freddie Freeman. The list goes on and on and on. And that's why they just win 8, 9, 10 games at a time. And they're really, again, their only weakness is maybe that bullpen. Okay, put you on the spot here just a few seconds. It's an elimination game or a game 7. Who has the best big game starter?
Jacob DeGrom, duh. Next
Really?
question. We're on to
Oh.
Cincinnati. Is it anybody else but Jacob DeGrom? Like,
I'd
I
go with
think his
Scherzer.
stuff is the best, but Max Scherzer gives up home runs. Like, I don't know, maybe Justin Verlander because he has tons of postseason experience.
Well, that's why I would go with Scherzer or Verlander, just because they have been in those big moments and gotten it done. So I would lean one of those guys over to Grom, but I understand why you like Jake.